Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad you can make it for this special presentation of results from the comprehensive evaluation of the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship Program. My name is Jennifer Pearl, and I'm the director of the STPF program, and as well a 2002-2003 STPF fellow. With me today is Dr. Karen Gareis. Dr. Gareis is a senior research associate with the Goodman Research Group, and she conducted the study for us. We'll start off with a short presentation and then go to questions from you. You don't need to wait till the end to enter your question. Click the question box in your menu and type your question in. We'll get to as many questions as we can. And before we begin the flow, I'd like to express some thanks to several of the STPF staff who helped make this webinar a possibility today. So thanks especially to Kat Song and Zach Everett, and also to Mike Wheeler and Olga Francois. So to give you a preview of what the webinar will consist of today, our title is Bringing Scientists to the Federal Government, How Well Does It Work? We'll talk about the rationale for the study and the methods that were used. We'll go over some key findings and areas for improvement, and then we'll do some Q&A. One of AAAS's earliest and strongest efforts to bring evidence to decision makers is the Science and Technology Policy Fellowship Program. Our mission is to connect science with policy and foster a network of science and engineering leaders who understand government and policy making and are prepared to develop and execute solutions to address societal challenges. This year, the fellowship has about 270 fellows in it, and you can see a picture of the current class below. Just as we want our fellows to bring a data-driven mindset to the federal government, we as a program want to be data-driven as well. Conducting an evaluation done by an expert external body is one way to get the data we need to help identify our areas of program improvement and tell our story better to all of our stakeholders, our current funders, future funders, alumni, potential applicants, offices, and agencies that host fellows. Karen, would you like to talk about the next few slides?
Sure. So the evaluation was designed to look at the impact of the program, both on fellows as well as on the mentors and host offices that hosted the fellows. So this slide shows you the key outcomes that we looked at. So for fellows, we were looking at the growth in their understanding of how public policy on science and technology is formulated and implemented. We also measured knowledge and skills in the areas of science and technology policy. We looked also at longer-term influences on fellows' careers after participating in the fellowship, including some of the professional activities and leadership experiences that they did after the fellowship. For the mentors and host offices, the primary thing we were looking at was the impact of the fellow contributions to the work of the office. So basically the value added that the fellows were bringing with their expertise and scientific knowledge. So there were a couple of parts to, a couple of pieces to the evaluation. So one of the things that I did is to review a bunch of materials, program materials. We also conducted primarily, most of the data that we're going to be talking about today come from surveys. We surveyed alumni from all cohorts of the fellowship going back to 1973. We ended up getting a pretty good response rate from them. So the response rate was 46% of the alumni that we invited responded, and that was a total of 1,261 alums. We also surveyed mentors from the past 5 cohorts, and there the response rate was about 38%. We got 235 mentors to fill out the survey. And then to sort of flesh out the findings from the primarily quantitative survey, we actually conducted interviews with randomly selected samples of alums and mentors. So we interviewed 24 alums and 14 mentors. We tried to get, the point of randomly selecting them was to try and get good representation across different offices and years and so on. I also interviewed key program staff at AAAS, so we conducted 7 staff interviews as well. Okay, and then just a description, from the fellows who were surveyed, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who they were and about the placements that they had. The most common discipline, scientific discipline among the fellows was biological sciences, which also includes agricultural and environmental science. That was just over a third of the fellows. About a quarter of the fellows, this is the next common grouping, were physical scientists. The majority of them, 96%, had a PhD. About 3/4 of the fellows come as early career fellows, which we defined as being in their postgraduate careers for less than 7 years. So about 2/3 of the fellows came directly to the fellowship from academia, mostly as graduate students or postdocs. That was 68%. And then about a quarter of the fellows returned to academia after the fellowship, but a larger number actually go into government positions. Of the alums that we interviewed, just over half were women, about 14% identified as a race other than white. We had about 1/3 who had served in legislative fellowships and 70% who had served in executive fellowships. That totals just a little bit more than 100% because there were some fellows who served in both branches multiple years. Of the executive fellowships, the most common were USAID, State Department, NSF, EPA, and NIH. Interestingly, before the fellowship, about 28% of the fellows came from the Mid-Atlantic region. 53% are in the Mid-Atlantic region now. And now I see that my camera is frozen, so I'm going to try turning it off and then back on.
Okay, so we can move on now to talk about some of the findings. So when we surveyed the fellows, we asked about satisfaction. What did they like it? We asked what they learned in terms of knowledge and in terms of ability. And we also asked about the impact that it had had on their careers going forward. And so let me start off with an overall satisfaction rating. 89% of the fellows expressed a high level of satisfaction. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, we broke that down into different components. Many of you know about our orientation, which is a hallmark of the program and really a great introduction to Washington. So the orientation was rated quite highly at 88% there. And then you can see going through the other circle pictures how the alumni rated other aspects of the STPF program. Now, we also asked the alumni what was their objective in signing up for the fellowship and coming to Washington for this program. And they had different objectives. They don't all have the same objectives. Some of the objectives that alumni cited were understanding the intersections between science and technology and policy. Others wanted to offer their skills and experience in public service or explore changing their career paths. Others wanted to advance in their current career, to learn to integrate policy into their own area of expertise, or to address policies of specific interest of them individually. And you can see how successful alumni felt the fellowship was in meeting those objectives. An overarching number that's not on this slide, but that's interesting to note, is that 87% of the fellows rated their experience as very or extremely successful in meeting their own #1 goal. Now, if we move to the next slide, this slide talks about knowledge and abilities. We hoped and wanted to see what the fellows learned in terms of knowledge and also what they learned in terms of knowing how to do something, enhance their abilities as a result of the fellowship program. And these graphs on this slide give the average rating just before the fellowship and the average gain after the fellowship in some key areas. The knowledge areas that we looked at are policy and science policy integration and workings of government, and we saw substantial gains in knowledge there. And then also in abilities, the two abilities that we tested are collaboration skills and science policy integration skills, and we also saw substantial gains there. One of the neat things about this evaluation is that Karen got quotes from many of the alumni who filled out the surveys or that she interviewed. And so throughout the presentation, we'll pepper the slides with some quotes. And one of the neat ones that someone said was, "I learned to translate geek into wonk." So in thinking about the fellows' contributions to their host offices, we asked them what they contributed and how meaningful were those contributions. This slide talks about that data. So if you go through the different slides, the different stages of the graphs, you can see that their assignments enhanced their knowledge, and many of them felt their contributions were meaningful to the work of their host office. Later on, we'll show you some data about what the mentors responded when we asked them similar questions. So the fellows felt that they were really making meaningful contributions. Okay, and we can go to the next slide. Now we're going to switch from talking about what they did during their fellowship to how the fellowship impacted their career and their activities beyond the fellowship. Many of the fellows reported engaging in specific activities that relate to science and policy as a direct result of their fellowship. For example, 76% advocated for specific policies after their fellowship concluded. And just over half crafted science policy position papers. We also asked them if they had run for office, and only 3% of them ran for office. In addition to asking about how the fellowship impacted their science policy activities after the fellowship, we asked them how it impacted their more general professional activities after the fellowship. And this slide details those responses. So we have here, 90% saying they gained a greater knowledge of career options. Numbers in the 80s and 90s talking about gaining lasting professional connections, engaging more with the government, adding value to their teaching, advising, or mentoring, and a good number as well changing their career trajectory, although that is not necessarily an aim of the fellowship program. Many fellows take on jobs closely related to policy after the fellowship, but even those who don't have been able to use their experience to enhance and augment their work. So here are two quotes from one alum who became a scientist in the federal sector. And this person said they've been specifically prohibited from participating directly in policymaking in their current role, but the fellowship helped to direct their research with policy implications in mind. Another fellow said the knowledge, connections, and resources gained through the fellowship have rippled well beyond my work through the mentoring and coaching I do for professionals at all career and educational stages. So this chart that we have up right now is one of my favorite slides in the whole presentation because it reflects the career trajectories of fellows before they came into the program, after they left the program, and then through the current day. And we had always heard a lot of stories about fellows' career trajectories, but never really knew the data of what do fellows do after the fellowship. So this is the first time that we were able to acquire actual data from a wide cohort of people, asking them, what did you do after your fellowship and what are you doing now? We typically do survey fellows who are completing their fellowship about what are your plans going forward, but the question is different when you ask somebody what their plans are when they haven't actually left yet, and then you do a retrospective survey of what did you actually do. So if you look at the left side of the picture, this graph shows the distribution among sectors before the fellowship and just after the fellowship. So you can see a large proportion of fellows are coming to the fellowship from the academic sector, either as faculty members, postdocs, or PhD students. And then after the fellowship, a good number of them are transferring to a government position. And these consist of government positions at the state, national, and local level. And then another question that we asked was, how does that actually change over time? Are they, as they go further in their career, are they staying in these sectors or are they morphing further? And if you look at the second, this is the right part of the slide now, you can see that many of them are staying in government sectors, with a good portion of them in academic, nonprofit, and for-profit sectors, but you can see more of them becoming retired, as time goes on. So now I'd like to switch gears a little bit and talk about the mentors who were surveyed. We asked mentors about their motivations for taking on a fellow, and we asked them about their experience with the STPF program. So 3/4 of them had been mentors for less than 5 years. Almost all of them, 84%, had mentored between 1 and 5 fellows. And 1/4 of them are alumni. And this is a really interesting statistics, because we find that oftentimes when we are able to bring on new agencies in the executive branch hosting fellows for our program, or new offices within in Congress or in the executive or judicial branch, that the mentors are often alums, and they bring this with them to their new workplaces. The 2 main primary objectives that mentors cited for bringing on fellows were to accomplish tasks they couldn't otherwise complete, and to bring a science and technical skill set to their office's work. We also asked mentors about satisfaction. So the overall satisfaction rating was 94% in their experience as a mentor. So this is an extremely high satisfaction rating. And you can see the distribution for other more specific items that we asked them about: fellows' work product, adaptability and flexibility of the fellows, the support provided by AAAS and by their own offices. And here we dive into a little bit more detail about what mentors say about the fellows, how they fit in and how they're prepared to contribute. You can again see very high ratings in the 80s and 90s for opportunities for the fellows to be useful in the office, how they integrate themselves into the office, the fellows being able to communicate to diverse audiences, being able to take on leadership roles and project assignments, and really the mentors are giving quite high ratings to the work that the fellows are doing in their offices. We also asked them what are some of the specific tasks that fellows worked on in the offices. Over half said that the fellows provided needed expertise to help address a complex problem. Other common responses included translating scientific content into more easily accessible terms, clarifying the interpretations of data and scientific evidence, providing data and scientific evidence to influence decisions, summarizing scientific information for a decision maker, applying the scientific method to find solutions to problems, and offering technical input that resulted in changes or plans to policies. We also asked the mentors, were they likely to host another fellow? And 77% said that they were likely to host another fellow. Here's some more quotes from fellows that we thought would be interesting to share. I'll read them out loud to you since we have a bit of time. It was a chance to do something new, get access to a job I'd never had, and it continues to pay dividends because there's so many alums out there. I personally connected to our science policy work as a foundation because of it. It was the most valuable experience that I've had to date. It was a true privilege to meet the people I did, get the experience and exposure provided, and serve in the public sector. I think this experience is fantastic for opening one's eyes to the ways in which the government works and what and where the levers are for using science to affect policy and how policy affects science. And this sentiment of the fellowship being able to open people's eyes or become a pivot point for them going forward is really common among what we hear from alums. We also asked mentors to give us some free-form information. This is the kind of thing we heard from mentors. It lets us bring a different perspective to the kinds of programmatic work we do, and it gives us access to the kind of people who would never otherwise consider coming to work for the government. It isn't the intention of the program for fellows to teach the hosts anything, but it was great for my office too. We ended up learning so much from our fellows. Honestly, having really smart people who are keen to contribute, keen to learn, and have a really thorough scientific background, it's just amazing. So mentors gave very laudatory remarks as well. And I'll mention that this is something that carries through to this day. We just completed our placement process for the incoming class of fellows, and there were over twice as many available positions for finalists as we had finalists to place. So the fellows are in extremely high demand in the federal sector. Okay. We also learned about some areas for improvement for our program. You know, if we think about why we took this task of conducting the evaluation on to begin with, we hope to be able to tell our story better, both for our applicants and for our funders and other partners. But we also wanted to find areas to improve the program and fine tune the program. So we want to share with you a little bit about the feedback we had along those lines. So what we heard from fellows, from former fellows, is that they want to strengthen ties with the program and engage with each other in meaningful ways. They want to create new collaboration, share information, and advocate for science. So we weren't surprised by this. We know that work with the alumni is an area of opportunity for us. And as a result of this information and other information that we've seen, we are launching an initiative pretty soon to think about how to engage more alumni in the program, in AAAS in general, and also to develop an alumni engagement process that will meet the alumni's needs and figure out exactly what they're looking for so that we can create something that alumni will be excited about. And unfortunately, it's going to mean that the alumni are going to have to do another survey, but it will help us going forward. And this really, this current study showed us that moving forward and enhancing what we do with alumni is something we really need to undertake. So keep your eyes open for that. Many fellows and mentors would like to see the program grow to include more host agencies and more fellows, and that's something that we're always thinking about. In the upcoming year, there's 2 agencies that have not hosted fellows, sponsored by AAAS recently, and that we're bringing on board. One is NOAA and the other is HHS. And then also in this past year, we have the Bureau of Labor Statistics that we brought on as a host office for the first time. So we're always thinking about you know, good placements for fellows. Some mentors suggested ways to improve the fellow selection and placement process, and we are looking at that process now to figure out how it can be more transparent and not quite so unwieldy. We did launch a new portal this year, electronic portal, to manage the placement and the application process. And as we are going through and looking at how that works the first year, we are putting in place improvements for next year, taking into account the feedback that we've gotten from our stakeholders. And some mentors asked for more guidance on how to determine best tasks for fellows. So we are thinking about also about how we work with our mentors and what information we share with them and how we can best set them up to succeed. So that is information that we are taking to heart as well. And with that, that is the last of the prepared slides that we have for you. And I think my colleague Kat Song is going to work with us on some questions.
Great, thank you. Jennifer and Karen, thanks again for taking us through the presentation, the slides, a summary document of all the findings, and a recording of this webinar will be available tomorrow at AAAS.org/STPF. So I expect you all have heard some things you long assumed. Maybe you heard something that surprised you. I certainly expect you to have some good questions. So send them to us by clicking the question box in your menu and typing in your question. I see some of them coming through already now, so I'll start there. Let's see. So which cohorts or years of STPF were considered for the survey interviews? And that's a very quick one, so I just want to tag on how represented, or do you have access to the rates of fellows who are social scientists?
So the first one, oh, sorry, Karen. Why don't you take it? This is good. You take it, Karen.
Yeah, so we invited all cohorts that we had good contact information from going back to 1973. We do have the percentage who are social scientists. I don't remember off the top of my head what the number was, but they were relatively rare. The biggest two groups I said were biological and physical scientists. So those together made up more than half of the fellows that we heard from. In terms of cohort year, I do know that we heard from a representative sample across all the cohorts. So, I mean, in terms of representativeness, at least in terms of cohort, it was representative. I did look at that. What were you going to say, Jennifer?
You got it, Karen.
Okay.
Okay, and then how representative are the survey demographics to the fellowship overall?
So the fellowship has not been one thing over the past 48 years. So it doesn't, when you say how representative are they to the class overall, that's, it's not an easy question to answer because the fellowship had different demographics all the way along. Karen, do you want to add anything more about that?
Yeah, I mean, actually, this is sort of in your purview, but when it started, they were all legislative, just for an example, and then they became more and more in the executive branch, so that changed over time. So the type of fellows, I think the host agencies changed over time, the sponsoring groups changed over time, so there would be different disciplines, different scientific disciplines over time. So it's hard to say. What we ended up with was a large sample that, I mean, at least we heard from all categories of people. It's hard to say exactly how representative they were since we're looking at a,
right,
you know, a huge and varied cohort.
And for example, we know the first class consisted of 7 fellows, 6 were men, they were all white, and they all served in the legislature. And now we have a class of 270 fellows. Only about 35 of them are in the legislature. The rest are in the executive branch with a handful in the judicial branch. They're predominantly female. And they're not all white anymore. So the demographics have shifted over time.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question. I'm interested in understanding what percentage responded and were non-responses thought about.
Yeah, so the percentage, I actually have this here. The percentages were, the alums on the survey, we heard back from 46% of the people we invited. That is actually comparable with other good surveys of membership groups, but it's likely that there's some amount of bias, probably toward positive. We did hear, toward positive ratings, people who are positively disposed toward the program, but we did hear, people were definitely willing to share challenges that they had. So it's not overwhelmingly biased. In terms of the mentors, we got 38% response rate. Again, around 40 is actually doing pretty well. Most surveys get about a quarter of respondents. So we did better than that. But I think there may be some sort of positivity involved.
Can you speak to any differences in the survey results between the congressional fellows and everyone else?
Definitely, yes. There were actually, so when we looked at what kinds of predictors predicted outcomes for fellows, we found that the biggest type of thing that predicted was the office or branch where they served, much more than fellow characteristics. Characteristics of the placement were what predicted outcomes. So we did see some different outcomes. Legislative, let me just pull up my summary here. I think one of the biggest differences we saw was between legislative and executive branch fellows. So in some ways, the legislative fellows had better outcomes in terms of learning how government works, which is really not terribly surprising. They were also, after the fellowship, the legislative fellows were more likely to be involved in specific policy and leadership activities. In terms of the mentors, the legislative mentors were slightly more satisfied with their fellows than the executive branch mentors, but it didn't necessarily go both ways. The legislative fellows were a little bit more likely to report that they had high workloads, super short timelines for things, and sometimes difficult supervisors. So yeah, so we did see differences there. There were also, what I thought was really interesting was differences by how many other scientists are in the office. So some place you go, it's full of other scientists, and in those, you're much more likely to be asked to do things that are well within your specialty. Other people are going to be the only scientist in the office. So in some of the legislative placements, they're going to be asked to go outside of their areas of expertise because they're the only scientists there. So they'll get a broader experience. And then in interviewing the mentors, I actually heard that there are differences between Senate and House of Representative placements in terms of that too. I forget which ones were more likely to be asked for things within their own discipline, but one of them was you were going to be asked to do more broad things. One, you were going to be asked to do narrow, specifically defined things. So that answered it.
Here's one. I like this one. In my year, there were only 7 fellows. I'm concerned now that getting close to 300. Is that too many?
So this is kind of an open question of what is the right size for the fellowship program. The fellows are in tremendous demand. I mentioned earlier our class of new fellows. So many fellows now are able to serve 2 years, but we'll bring in about 150 or 160 new fellows next year into the executive branch. And when we went through this placement process, we had requests for 300 fellows. Similarly on the Hill, when we canvass the Hill offices to ask who would like a science fellow, we typically get requests for 100 fellows. And together, AAAS with all its partner societies will be able to fund between 30 and 35 fellows. So the demand greatly exceeds the supply from all parts of the government. At the same time, we don't want to run a program that is too big that we can't run well. So we're very focused on doing a good job at what we do, and we don't want the program to grow too big so that it becomes unmanageable. And also, we want to make sure that we're really putting quality applicants in the fellowship spots.
This is a question for Karen. Does your group, GRG, do similar evaluations of similar organizations? And if so, how does STPF stack up?
We do, actually. So we broadly evaluate any kind of program that has to do with learning. So it could be professional development, museum exhibits, public television shows. We also do a lot of things that involve science, and we have done a lot of past evaluations of fellowship programs. For instance, we did for about 4 or 5 years, we were the external evaluators for the Einstein Fellowship Program, where they bring K through 12 STEM teachers into government and place them in places like NSF. So in some ways, that's a little bit of a similar thing, you know, about learning how government works and extending into career possibilities that are, you know, not necessarily the traditional academic ones or not necessarily the traditional ones that teachers would have. I would say that in terms of the outcomes and the results, one of the things that was really fun about this evaluation was the interviews, talking to the fellows and the mentors. I think that this program was really positively received. So people had a lot of stories about how transformative it was. I see some similarities there with the Einstein evaluation, but this is more positive than a lot of other programs we evaluate.
Okay. Did the survey find any major differences between recent fellowship classes and earlier classes of fellows?
I wondered if people would ask that. It is hard to compare because, as Jennifer noted, the fellowship was such a different thing in the early years from the later years. Another difference besides the growing size and the movement into the executive branch was the provision of more sort of professional development opportunities in a more formal way for the more recent fellows. So we didn't really see any massive differences by cohort in terms of fellow satisfaction or outcomes. We did see earlier cohort fellows reported slightly more involvement in policy and leadership activities afterwards, but they were older, so there was more time for them to have done that. So differences we found were small and a little hard to interpret. Yeah, but overwhelmingly, things about, it was much more about the branch and the host office that impacted the experience and the outcomes.
Has there been a shift in the executive agencies participating in the last few years? Or what kind of trends, I guess, with, amongst our partner agencies?
So different, you know, agencies kind of come in waves. The USAID and EPA used to fund a lot of fellows and are funding maybe a bit fewer than they have in the past. The State Department will have possibly its biggest class ever coming up next year. NSF has hosted a lot of fellows in recent years, whereas I was an NSF fellow in 2002 and there were 4 people in my class. So, you know, agencies kind of ebb and flow over time depending on what's going on at the agency.
There's another. Which of the findings were most surprising to STPF staff, if any?
I don't know, Kat, what was most surprising to you?
Gosh, I mean, I'm going to say the positive response to most of from both mentors and fellows was pretty large. I've just never really seen that in a survey.
Yeah, I mean, usually 90% of the people don't like anything, so it's very hard to get 90% of the people to say they like something. So that was pretty nice to see, and I guess for me also, you know, we had heard all these anecdotes all along, but we didn't have any hard data. So you always wonder, if you have anecdotes, is it just the happy people that are talking to you, or, you know, is this really kind of the norm of what's going on? So, you know, whatever sampling bias we have put aside, I think that was pretty nice to see what we thought might be true coming through in the data.
I thought it was interesting, actually. We asked fellows and mentors got some of the same questions asked of them. And the mentors were even more positive about the fellows' contributions than the fellows were. So fellows were a little bit underplaying what they might have contributed. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Oh, another thing that I found interesting is that I thought, we asked Karen to do a lot of subgroup analysis. What can you tell us about, about the fellows that were early career or later career or earlier cohorts or later cohorts or women or men or, in biologists versus social scientists versus engineers. And the subgroup analysis that she didn't show very many differences, right? There were some differences in some ways, but in general, the fact that there was very few subgroup differences was interesting and surprising to me.
Which plays into the question I was just about to ask you, and I'll just ask it anyway. It came in. Were there any notable findings with respect to Black and Hispanic fellows?
Our numbers weren't really large enough to support the statistical analyses to answer those questions. We did do sort of a broad overall check and see if there were differences in satisfaction, and there were not. But we couldn't really delve deeply into the predictive analysis because the subgroups were just too small still.
Okay. I know STPF is nearing its 50th anniversary. How do these results shape the goals for the program looking toward the next 50 years?
Well, we're thinking broadly about the 50th anniversary. We want to celebrate our 50th anniversary, which will be in 2023. We also want to think towards the future about what kind of legacy this program can foster. How can we inform the community going forward? So celebrating the past, looking towards the future, and thinking about our contribution. And I think everything from the survey plays in, as does a lot of feedback that we're getting from many different stakeholder groups as we think about planning the 50th anniversary.
Okay. Can you elaborate on the points of mentors wanting more guidance on good tasks and projects for fellows? Is this a desire to have more clearly articulated overall goals for each agency?
My feeling about some of that is that certain agencies like EPA and NSF have sort of strict rules about what kinds of tasks you can ask fellows to do. And so sometimes it's hard for them to, I think that maybe that was part of what was going on. Jennifer, did that feel like?
Yeah, I think so. The fellowship is implemented in different ways at different agencies. And some agencies have more restrictions on what fellows can do than others. So I think, as Karen mentioned, that in some agencies, the mentors are not quite sure what they're allowed to ask fellows to do. So my impression was that it spoke to that.
And I think some of the mentors, a few of them, sort of seemed to think that maybe people weren't offering challenging or interesting enough tasks. But I think that was some mentors thinking about other mentors in their office.
Okay, do you expect the economic downturn to impact the number or kind of fellowship placements in the next few years?
I will say that the economic downturn has had a huge impact, I know, on, for example, university hiring, nonprofit hiring, even in some cases, the private sector hiring. So that means that it makes it tough for people who might be fellows who need jobs to get jobs in those sectors. So sometimes, like if you look at applications to graduate school, for example, they go up when the economy goes down. So I think that we may be seeing a phenomenon like this going forward, although I'm not sure. We haven't seen any less demand for our fellows this year, for example. We were also concerned about the pandemic and whether fellows would want to come and do this in a time when we're having a public health crisis, and whether our agencies and offices would be able to onboard the fellows in this kind of situation. But we were really surprised to see that both on both sides, the fellows want to come and the agencies say they can do it. So we're looking at, we're predicting that our class size next year will be about the same size as this year's. And I think going forward beyond that, we'll just have to see.
Okay. Can you comment on the competitiveness of the fellowship as far as, you know, rate of success of applications over the years?
So the rate of success of applications differs a lot by branch of the fellowship. And we have also changed the way our application process is structured over the course of the life of the fellowship. So it's a little bit hard to do year-over-year comparisons. And we also have different number of slots in the different branches. So for example, the congressional slots that there are about 24 professional societies that support congressional fellows. For AAAS itself, we have 2 slots, and we're typically getting 120, 130 applications for those 2 spots. So that's super competitive. For the spots in the executive branch, we have each year we bring on about 150, 160 new executive branch fellows. And the success rate there is somewhere around 50%. It varies a bit by year, and I don't want to be, I know we're going to put this on the web, so don't take that as a hard number, but that's a reasonable ballpark figure.
What were the other disciplines that were included in the survey? Were there any social scientists included in the survey?
There were social scientists included in the survey, yes. Let me see if I can quickly locate.
And I'm looking for a new question. Hold on. Okay. Did this survey include partner society? Oh, so go ahead, Karen.
Yes, we did. We had the biggest 2 were biological and physical sciences. Social scientists were the next largest group at 15%. We also had 14% who were in engineering, 11% who were in health and medical sciences, and then 1% each in math, statistics, and in computer and information sciences.
Did the survey include partner society fellows, and were there any differences between their results and those of other fellows?
We did include partner society fellows. However, we did not do a breakdown. We didn't look at subgroup differences there.
Okay, here's a question. A small proportion of fellows ran for office. Is increasing that number a potential goal for STPF?
It is not. There are other organizations that have that as a goal. It's not ours.
Okay. How can AAAS promote knowledge about policy and policy-related careers among scientists?
Well, one thing that we find is that our alumni are our best ambassadors. We have a robust recruitment program, and we are conducting outreach at conferences, at universities, through social media, all the different venues that we can find, but nobody is as good of an ambassador as a program as an alum. So I would ask I know there are a lot of alums in the audience today. If you're interested in helping us in that endeavor, please get in touch with me or in touch with Kat, and we'll figure out how to make that happen.
Do you foresee this study extending to a periodic evaluation that probes longitudinal questions, or was this study a one-time activity?
So one of the things that we're thinking about is an ongoing monitoring and evaluation plan, and conducting a study like this. Maybe we don't have to go back all the way to the beginning, but a study like this in future years is certainly on the table. However, I will note that this study it was approved by an IRB, and it has been de-identified. The data is de-identified. So what we cannot do is take responses from this survey and responses from a future survey and match them to a respondent, to a person. We would not be able to do that, for example.
It's good to hear about the overwhelming positive feedback from fellows and mentors. What were the lessons learned from the responses that were not so positive?
So I think those were pretty well summarized on the slide that we had about areas of improvement. The selection and placement process for our mentors is something that we need to do better on. The outreach that we do to alumni right now, the way we engage with alumni is pretty informal. We have a listserv that's very bright, very vibrant, but it is a listserv. And we reach out to them from time to time to take part in our events, invite them to something or ask them to participate. But we don't have, for an example, a formal structure around the alumni. So that was a clear area for improvement. And then also guidance to mentors is something that we take away.
Did satisfaction and/or career advancement responses differ between fellows who are early, mid, and late career?
I think not really, but I'll let you address that, Karen.
Yeah, surprisingly, not really. There were, I don't think there were actually any differences when we compared early to mid and late career in terms of the quantitative outcomes that we looked at. There were a few comments. Some of the open-ended comments, people felt like they were getting different things out of the fellowship or bringing different things to it. But in terms of the quant outcomes, not really.
Geographers are social, physical, and data scientists. Where do geographers fall in your screening?
I think we asked people to self-identify. So they had to choose. We gave them categories and they had to pick.
I'm still looking at the chat here. We might be coming to an end of questions. Still have a few minutes, guys. You want to type something in there? Were you able to learn about the career trajectories of the fellows post STPF, or how they changed over the years, I guess, career trajectories?
We did ask them about that. We asked them we asked them what sector they were in, and then we actually asked them for each time they changed into a different sector or a different job, whether it was in this, yes. Short answer is we did look. I think that most people tended to change sectors only once or twice. But a lot of people changed sector right after the fellowship. So it was pretty transformative in terms of career trajectory.
Mm-hmm. I remember, Karen, one of the things that I asked you to analyze was whether there was a lot of switching back and forth.
Yes.
Did our fellows switch sectors more than like an average person might? And you found that the answer to that was no.
Not really. There were a few people who switched a lot, but also we don't have comparison data for, scientists like this. How many, how often they would ordinarily, it's hard to know, but they didn't switch a huge amount on average.
How has the program management changed to address mentor satisfaction in regards to communication or support from STPF?
So we have some of the things that have happened recently in the last year or two is that we have done more mentor onboarding in the beginning of the fellowship year. Some agencies have their own orientation for mentors, and for the ones that don't, we have started doing webinars ourselves, so trying to give more information to mentors. Another example is the selection and placement portal that we've developed, trying to be more transparent and have better, more transparent and less onerous, sort of not so many emails, but making our technology more modern to be able to work with them in that way.
Were there any comments directly about the 2-week orientation program, particularly its size? I'm not sure what size means, but
overall, the comments about the 2-week orientation were super positive. A lot of people wish that all scientists could have that kind of orientation. There were a few sort of random things like, I didn't like being in a conference room for that long, but overall pretty positive. I don't think anything directly referenced the size, but satisfaction was really high. When you look at satisfaction with different aspects of the fellowship and the support and the logistical and administrative support, I'm pretty sure that 2-week orientation got the highest satisfaction.
has there been a change over the years in the proportion of early versus mid versus late career fellows?
I don't think we have great data going back that far for that particular thing, or at least I haven't seen it. So I guess the answer is I don't know. One of the things we are doing is working hard to recruit more folks at mid and later careers, because we feel like the balance is good, really good for the program. And we're going to have a webinar later this month talking about particularly faculty on sabbatical doing the fellowship.
And I'll just add that, you know, going forward, we have made recent changes in our systems and data collection. So each year we're getting better and better at longitudinal data collecting. So,
and along those lines, so we survey the current fellows several times a year, and also the mentors at the end of the year. And starting in this current class, the questions that the fellows and the mentors are asked are aligned to the questions that Karen used for the survey. So we should be able to kind of use the survey information as a baseline and think about what we're getting from our current classes in comparison.
Jennifer and Karen, I just want to thank you again and for all the questions from you all. We've come pretty close to the end of the hour. I want to thank you all for attending. We don't want this to be the last time we hear from you. So one easy way to reach out to us is via email, fellowships@AAAS.org. And for those of you who are fellows, stay engaged with us. Make sure your profile information is up to date on Fellows Central. If you have a question about that, email us, fellowship@AAAS.org. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your day.